welcome to Tabletop Tommies. I'm Johnny.
And I'm Phil.
And in today's episode, we're going to go through some rules, some potentially misplayed rules, or some rules that you might never played yet, so that you know what they are when they come up. Before we do that, I just want to add a clarifier on the Armies of Slovakia episode. One of the things we missed in that episode is if you take the Slovak generic reinforced platoon, so not a generic reinforced platoon of the Armies of Slovakia, but the specific selector, the Slovak generic reinforced platoon, we missed an option in there. So in the tank slot, you can actually take a Panzer IIF, a Panzer IIIN, or a Marder IIIH as your tank option. So nice little bit of extra variety there for you. I don't think it hugely changes our summary of the strength of Slovakia, but it is something we missed, so we thought we'd just throw it in now as a bit of a clarifier. An additional announcement is that the pack and the tickets are now live for the World Open War Team England qualifiers. So if you are English by the criteria laid out in the pack and you are interested in playing for Team England at the World Open War, you can join the Facebook event page for more information. And even if you're not planning to join us for World Open War itself, but you do just want to see how a very competitive tournament runs, you're more than welcome to come along and test your mettle against the players who are looking to get into the team. All the information on the qualifier, such as the restrictions and the selection criteria, are in the pack. So get yourself over to the Facebook page if you're interested.
So, Johnny, what is today's episode all about?
Today's episode is all about penetration, inspired primarily by the new Italian rules from Case Blue. So these have caused quite a few questions in the community, because not only are they quite a good set of rules if you're facing off against the traditional Stuart spam in competitive tournaments, but they also give the Italians a really nice boost. And so I think we're going to see these rules coming up very frequently now, especially at tournaments. And so I think the best place to start is maybe if you would just read the rule for us, Phil. So what is the rule that we're talking about specifically?
So this is from Case Blue. It's the new Italian rules, which this particular rule also applies to Hungary and Romania. And it's the Improvised AT rule. So if I read the Italian version and substitute Italian for Hungarian or Romanian as appropriate. So the Italian army suffered from a chronic deficiency of anti-tank equipment. What AT weapons they did possess often struggled against Soviet tanks, such as the T-34 and KV-1. As a result, Italian soldiers often had to improvise any way they could to knock out Soviet armour. When rolling to penetrate enemy vehicles using AT grenades or weapons with less than +3 penetration, the player may elect to re-roll the result.
Thank you very much, sir. So the first question that I've seen the community asking is, does it work for small arms like rifles?
No, is my immediate gut response, because they don't have a penetration value. It's not that their value is 0, they just don't have a penetration value because they're not classed as a heavy weapon.
Exactly. That's my reading of it as well. If you look at the weapons chart on page 225 of the bolt action rulebook, rather than saying pen 0, they just have a dash in that slot because, as you say, they don't have a pen value. So it's not that their pen value is less than 3, they don't have one. And so that's also... So rules as written, I'd say it doesn't apply to them. But also I know Alex, the author, replied to one of these questions on the Facebook bolt action page saying that it was also the intention it doesn't apply to small arms. I think his plan, he has passed it back to Warlord for future FAQ, because it is a question that's coming up quite a bit. But when we'll see that, anybody's guess, I guess.
So presumably people were maybe wanting this to apply to small arms fire for instances when they're firing small arms at soft skin vehicles and they need to roll that 6 to damage. They don't get that 6. By reading the Improvised AT rule in a certain way and suggesting, claiming, arguing that small arms do have a penetration value of 0, that therefore allows that reroll against soft skin vehicles. Is that right?
Exactly, yeah. That's exactly where the thinking was. Okay. But I think, for clarity, small arms never get that perk, I don't think. And so that hopefully nicely clears that up. The next question, though, that arises from this exact same rule, which would be interesting to get your thoughts on, is your heavy autocannon. Now, that has an anti-tank shell, of +3 penetration. So that anti-tank shell doesn't. However, at long range, there is an argument or a question people have asked. Do you get to reroll at long range because of the additional -1?
Okay, so the wording is then that weapons with less than a +3 penetration may re-roll the result. Obviously, with a penetration of +3 as the base, if you like, or the standard for an heavy autocannon, on that reading, you wouldn't re-roll because it's got a +3 penetration. The wording is with less than +3.
Exactly, yeah. But then the counter argument is at long range, it's now a weapon of only +2 penetration.
Mm-hmm.
And so it now gets to re-roll. So if your Steward backs up an inch, suddenly the autocannon gets better at penetration.
Got it. Okay. So I guess this is going to come down to when you're adding the various modifiers to the penetration or the damage chart when you're rolling for penetration. It's whether or not you lower the penetration value or you lower the dice result due to the modifiers.
Yeah, that's exactly my thought as well. Are these modifiers to the dice roll or the penetration value of the weapon?
Okay.
Now, page 106 of the rulebook has some information on that. So the bottom right paragraph.
So this is the damage versus armored targets section. Okay, page 106, yeah. So because armored targets have a damage value of 7+ or greater, it is impossible for them to be damaged by small arms fire. Hits from small arms fire are ignored. They cannot damage the vehicle, and hits do not pin. Note that open-topped armor targets are an exception to this general rule, as described on page 118. So this is because small arms fire doesn't have a penetration value to get you up to a result of 7+.
Yeah, just universally, small arms can't hurt armored targets, basically, is what that says.
Yeah. Okay. So next paragraph. When shooting against armored vehicles with a heavy weapon, and a heavy weapon is defined as something with a penetration value earlier on in the rulebook, the following penetration modifiers apply, in addition to the weapon's own modifier, as shown on the weapons charts, see page 62. Remember, these additional modifiers do not apply to small arms fire or to fire against soft-skin vehicles, but only to shots from heavy weapons against armored targets. And then remember also that an unmodified roll of 1 always fails to damage regardless of modifiers. So the 3 modifiers that are referenced here then is hitting a vehicle's side or top armor gives a +1 additional penetration modifier. Hitting a vehicle's rear armor gives a +2 additional penetration modifier. And firing at long range gives a -1 additional penetration modifier.
Yeah. And so my reading from that is these modifiers aren't to the actual weapon, and the weapon's penetration value is a modifier to your dice roll. So you roll your dice, and let's say you get a 3. You then add on the weapon's penetration value of 3 to take you to 6. You might be shooting the rear armor, so you add another 2 on to take you to 8. And then let's say you're at long range, you take that -1 off that dice roll. And so that takes you back to 7. Because the long range is in the table with the side and rear armor, I read the long range not as a modifier to the weapon, but to a modifier to the dice roll.
To the result of the dice roll. Okay.
What do you think?
So what does it say in the actual shooting section of the rulebook with regards to rolling to hit, rolling to damage, and so on?
What do you mean?
Well, so if we take it back, so obviously the firing at armored vehicle section of the rulebook is a special additional part that follows on from the general rules with regards to shooting at units and damaging units. So if we look at the original section in the rulebook on shooting, if it says there, roll a d6, add the following modifiers, that is different to roll a d6 with these modifiers already taken into account with regards to your penetration value, and then see what the result is. Does that make sense?
So page 56 is where you've got roll to damage.
Roll to damage, yeah.
Yep.
No, it's roll to penetrate, isn't it? It's roll to...
I mean, the bit that you're looking for is actually in the 106 paragraph where it says the following penetration modifiers apply in addition to the weapon's own modifier.
Okay, so let's go back to the heavy autocannons. The heavy autocannon's penetration modifier is +3. I'm then firing at long range to bring it down to +2. Am I doing, it's BODMAS, for want of a better phrase, in the sense of, am I doing all of the modifiers independently of the dice roll, then I roll a dice and whatever the previous result of all my modifiers was gets added on? Or am I rolling a dice, then adding the penetration value of the weapon, then taking away or adding further modifiers such as long range, side armor, rear armor?
Well, I think the weapon always has that penetration value, is my reading.
Yeah.
Because it says so to jump back to that 106 paragraph,
Yeah.
when shooting against armored vehicles with a heavy weapon, the following penetration modifiers apply in addition to the weapon's own modifier as shown on the weapons chart. And so I think the weapon's pen value is a modifier you're adding. And so that long range isn't modifying the original pen value. I think it's just an additional modifier. And so you're going up because of the pen value, down because of the long range, up because of the rear armor, etc.
Okay, yeah. So that in addition then is actually a key clause there. So going back to our heavy autocannon, so what you're saying then is that a heavy autocannon would not be able to re-roll using the Italian improvised AT rule because it fails at the first hurdle because its penetration value is not less than +3.
Yes, exactly. And I also think that improvised AT rule, the weapon always has a +3 modifier, a +3 penetration value, sorry. So I think, going back to the improvised AT rule, I think that clause of weapons with less than +3 penetration, that autocannon, no matter how you shoot it, always has that +3 penetration value with an anti-tank shell in it.
Yeah, so that it fails then at the first hurdle in the sense of, first clause, does it have a penetration value of less than 3? No, right, stop reading.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think the only place where there's a little bit of uncertainty added is underneath the table of modifiers where it says vehicle side armor, for example. It says when shooting the side armor, etc., the weapon's penetration value is increased by +1.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've said that these things are modifiers to the roll. And then in a bit of clarification text, it says that it's actually modifying the weapon's penetration value.
Yeah, as opposed to saying the weapon's penetration value is always X. However, you then add various other modifiers up or down to the dice roll.
Exactly, yeah. So starting at 106, the bit that we read, that bit there implies that these modifiers are just modifiers to the roll.
Yeah.
But then underneath that, it's talking about the actual weapon's penetration value.
Yeah. That's what I was getting at with my whole BODMAS thing, but not explaining it very well, which is, do you do all of the modifications and then you do the dice roll, or do you effectively stop, you drop things out as you work down the list of clauses? Yeah.
I think, so the way I think I would rule this is that the heavy autocannon never gets to use the improvised AT rule because it is a weapon with +3 penetration, and additionally, the modifiers are modifiers to your roll rather than modifiers to the actual weapon. Mm-hmm. That's the way that I think I would rule it. I mean, what about you?
I think based on what we've read and said, putting me on the spot, then yes. Mm-hmm. I'm now thinking back to the question we had many, many episodes ago about HMGs.
Yeah.
And whether or not HMGs can pin at long range.
And I now think that they can.
Yeah.
So I think we said in that episode they can't.
Yeah.
This whole question, when it came up, reminded me of that. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to do this episode, because I actually think we were incorrect. If that is what we said at the time, which I think it is.
I think I was quite clear that was what I said. Yep.
Yeah.
In pre Case Blue days, I will add.
Yeah. And I think we might have been wrong. And I think that actually a heavy machine gun at long range can still pin and can still pen if it can get through the armor. And so, for example, let's say you've got the rear armor on a M24 Chaffee light tank, so armor 8 on the front, armor 6 on the back. Mm-hmm. You're firing the HMG at long range, so it's strength 1, or penetration value 1. Mm-hmm. The rear armor of 6. I would need a 5, but I'm at long range, and therefore I need a 6 to glance the rear armor. Whereas I think we argued previously that you've reduced the penetration value to 0 of the weapon, and so it couldn't do damage.
Therefore, you can't pen. Yeah.
But I actually now think it can do damage at long range because it still is a heavy weapon. Mm-hmm. It still has a penetration value. Even if we do the reading of the rule where the -1 takes the actual weapon's value to 0, it still has a penetration value. Mm-hmm. Admittedly, that value is 0. But it still has a value. And so I actually think that at long range, heavy machine guns can still damage and therefore do still pin. Mm-hmm. But what are your thoughts, Phil? Do you think that do you now think the HMG can do damage at long range, or are you still of the mindset that it can't?
I think on the same logic with regards to heavy autocannons and improvised AT, then it can. What I'm also thinking is this would be something that would be really good to clarify in version 3.
Yeah, I think if we ever see another FAQ, I think that basically tidying up one of those rules tidies up the other.
Yeah.
Because if we tidy up the improvised AT to say that weapon is always penetration 3, regardless of range, then that also tells us that the HMG is always penetration 1, regardless of range. Equally vice versa, if they do say that the heavy autocannon can do this, then it means the autocannon does drop down to strength 2 at long range. Then it means the HMG drops to 0. I think that probably still needs clarity as to whether an penetration 0 weapon can do damage. I would argue it can either way. And so if you're arguing the other way, I'd say we definitely do need that FAQ, don't we? An interesting one, though.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess it does have, for some people, maybe you're listening going, why does this matter? But I think it is relevant in the sense of because of the new Case Blue rules and the Italians, we are starting to see more and more Italians appearing at higher level competitive events, because this does make them very good with regards to autocannons. And as we as we do see autocannons appearing in those competitive events, because generally speaking, you're facing Armour 8 vehicles. So if you've got a light autocannon, at the very least that you can stick a pin on it and glance it from the front and penetrate it from the side. If we start to see more and more Italians being taken, there's going to be more instances where somebody might be using a heavy autocannon with this Italian special rule, having this very conversation in the middle of a game at an event.
Yeah, I think it's certainly one to clarify with a TO, either if you're planning to bring your Italians or if you are facing them before the game starts, just clarify this rule with a TO, because there could be a moment in the game where the heavy autocannon goes off at long range and suddenly you have to make that decision when it actually matters. It's always better to have these decisions before it matters. And also, I mean, heavy machine guns are quite rare generally, but if you are running against Americans, especially thematic Americans, a lot of the vehicles come with a heavy machine gun as standard.
Yeah.
And so like your M3 half track, which is a very thematic transport choice, that's coming with the HMG as standard. We really do need to know how this affects it. And so I think check with your TO, but the way I am currently leaning is that heavy autocannons don't get to use the improvised AT rule at any range, and heavy machine guns can do damage even at long range.
Can pin.
And pin, naturally.
Yeah. The pinning was the thing we were discussing in the episode way back, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I now think they can do both damage and pins.
As in HMG shooting the rear, +1, +2, it can get over the line. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So I think if I pull up my M3 half track pulls up behind a Stuart with its vulnerable bum, armor 5 on the back, I'm at long range, so -1 for long range, but +3 for the rear arm of the Stuart.
So it's still +2 net overall.
It's +2 net overall, which means I only need 5, a natural 5 on the dice to do superficial damage and a 6 to do a penetrating hit. That's my thinking.
Natural 6, surely.
No, because it's rear armor is 5, isn't it? Because you get an additional +1 on the back of a Stuart.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's -3, but my weapon has been dropped to 0 effectively, and so a 5 does glance, 6 does pen. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my summary. Did you have a summary you wanted to throw in?
No.
No.
Unless you want me to have a summary and I can put one together.
Just if you disagreed would be the summary. If you disagreed with that summary, then you could give your summary.
Yeah.
That actually, I still don't think they can pin and do damage at long range. In which case, we then have an ongoing thing.
I think in the absence of very, very clear rules wording, and almost, and I've said this before, almost like sequential stages mapped out based on what we've read and discussed, that makes sense to me. The pen value is always whatever the pen value is. Then you affect the result with the modifiers rather than reducing the pen value or increasing the pen value.
Yeah, and it's just the only thing that adds a little bit of uncertainty for me is on 107 where you've got both versions basically written quite clearly, where you've got one version that says you're modifying the roll and one version that says you're modifying the weapon.
And it's one of those, we don't see it all the time, but we do see it where the fluff that precedes or follows a specific sort of, rule bit can often sometimes give a different spin on what the rule has said.
Yeah. And that actually, I'm going to take that and run with it. And I'm going to say that those bold subheadings of vehicle side armor, vehicle top armor, those clarifying statements, I'm just going to read them as sort of fluff, for want of a better word. Yeah, they're just explaining the rule, and they're not the actual rule itself, and therefore we should always defer back to the original rule rather than the explanation statements. That's what I'm going to say going forward. So join us in 50 episodes' time when we change our minds and go back to the original reading of the rule that we had. Brilliant.
Hopefully by then, in 50 episodes' time, we'll have a new version and it'll be clearer.
Yes, please.
Yeah. He says in February 2024.
Yep, get that on the record. If there are any other rules questions you'd like us to look at and see and hear our thoughts on them, we might not get an answer for you, but we'll certainly hash through it. Do let us know. Send them in.
Please continue to like, share and subscribe. And as Johnny has said, drop us a message. Any rules that you want us to discuss, clearly or unclearly, depending on your view on this episode. We're very happy to pick that up. And indeed, if there's anything else you want us to discuss on the pod, ta-ta from now.
Ta-ta for now.